exactly 6 a.m. The tranquility of a sleepy rural dawn shattered beneath the weight of one Jersey cow named Dolly, who lumbered through the hedge line like a clumsy specter of rebellion and stomped into a rose garden that wasn't hers. The morning air, once tender and wrapped in birdsong, now reverberated with deep, bellowing moo that cracked like thunder against the manicured silence of suburbia. She rammed her head repeatedly, though not violently, against porcelain bird bath, summoning breakfast from its cold stone basin. From the second-story window came a shriek sharp enough to pierce bone, followed by the flurry of pink silk pajamas fluttering down a staircase. Karen burst out of her back door, her slipperless feet slapping against stone, screaming words that barely formed sentences. The only living beings who dared respond were her dogs, Sir Fluffington and Duchess, who dropped their squeaky toy in shock and bolted behind the nearest hedge. This was not an accident, bent years in the making, slow burn of tension that had just ignited its first real flame. But if anyone asked the moment the cows marched through Karen's azalea-bordered property was when the war truly began. Only day before, Karen had smiled that insufferable, smug smile and told me fences don't apply to everyone. Her words hung in the air like the lingering scent of chemical spray tan, artificial and cloying. But this was not just about trespassing or property lines. This was about entitlement so thick it could be poured into molds and sold at the hoe bake sale. My name is Luke, and I am not someone you typically find involved in neighborhood drama. I don't do confrontation. I do cows, chickens sometimes, goats when they behave. I live on piece of farmland that has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather raised me out here, teaching me the rhythms of soil, sun, and slow growth, the language of land that doesn't yield easily and never forgets light. When he passed, he left the farm to me. Over time, I modernized things a little, installed solar panels, upgraded irrigation, and developed a rotational grazing system that kept the fields healthy and the animals happier. The land repaid me in peace, solitude, and a kind of quiet strength that doesn't advertise itself. My back pasture edges up against suburban development. They call it Serenity Pines. I call it the encroachment. On paper, there's clear line between their manicured chaos and my muddy order, but paper rarely stands up to people like Karen. The hoe that governs their little world is famous for its iron grip, mailbox heights, grass blade lengths. Even the angle of porch swings must be pre-approved, but they have no jurisdiction over me. My land is old enough and grandfathered and deep enough that not even their bylaws can touch me. And until Karen moved in, that line between us held firm. Karen was like a tropical storm disguised as a socialite. She arrived in a moving truck wrapped in decals from a home staging company she claimed to consult for, wearing heels unsuited for gravel and sunglasses large enough to eclipse her entire face. Her dogs barked nonstop, emitting hype, alarms that seemed biologically engineered to shatter human focus. And from the first day, she walked those dogs along the very edge of my pasture as if measuring it, not with tape, but with disdain. She would pause sometimes right where the fence met the shared border and stare like queen inspecting contested territory. And one day, the staring stopped. She stepped inside. I remember the moment because of its absurd normalcy. She didn't sneak. She didn't even check if anyone was watching. She just unclipped the latch on the gate and strolled in like it was public park. Her dogs bounded ahead, their pink sweaters a blur against the brown and green. I stood in disbelief for a second, thinking perhaps she had mistaken the boundary. Maybe she thought the field was community land. But that hope died quickly. I caught up to her near the far side of the field where Buttercup, my gentlest cow and currently very, very pregnant, was grazing. I approached cautiously, not wanting to spook either animal or human. "Excuse me," I said, soft but firm. "This is private land. I need to ask you not to walk your dogs through here." Karen turned as if I were an unwelcome breeze. She smiled, no warmth, only condescension, and replied, "Well, I figured a little walk wouldn't hurt. They need space to stretch their legs. You've got plenty of it." I reiterated, "This isn't dog trail. It's an active pasture. The cows can be spooked. There are risks. Please don't cross the fence again." She gave me the kind of look usually reserved for waitstaff when they forget lemon in the water. Then she waved her hand like she was brushing off a speck of dust that dared speak. "Relax, so," she said. "It's just fence. It's not like I'm stealing anything. I checked the fence that evening. One section, 4 feet wide, had been snipped clean through. Not worn down, not broken, cut with intent. I checked the footage from my security camera the next morning. There she was, neon tracksuit, bolt cutters, walking through like Caesar through Gaul with Fluffington and Duchess tearing after cow-tails like this was some royal hunt. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not rage, Not even indignation, just a firm clicking understanding that this woman had declared something silently but unmistakably. This land should be mine, and once someone believes they're owed what's yours, no amount of polite conversation will unmake that belief. Still, I gave her chance. I showed her the video, clear as day her response. After real belly-deep laughter, then she said, "Fences can't stop nature. Dogs are free spirits. You should thank me. That fence was hideous anyway." I didn't respond, not verbally. A few days later, I received an official letter from the Hoa. According to them, I had erected unauthorized fencing on shared green space. Complaint had been filed. The evidence, Karen's word, they even included map, crudely marked to show the encroachment, my family's land, redrawn by suburban highlighters. That's when I knew this wasn't personal, this was systemic. Karen wasn't an anomaly, she was a manifestation of something far more malignant. Entitlement institutionalized. This wasn't about cows or dogs, it was about control, who wields it, who's allowed to say no, and who isn't. So I stopped fighting with words. I drove to the county archives. I dug through decades of deeds, surveys, handwritten maps on faded parchment, and that's where I found it, buried in folder labeled agricultural easements. 1950s, I found my answer, legal right-of-way for livestock movement that ran straight through what was now Karen's backyard, dormant, forgotten, still valid. As I held that paper in my hands, I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded, rooted, like the land itself had whispered back. I remember, and I knew what came next. Not revenge, not escalation, just restoration. She turned my pasture into her playground. I would turn her backyard into a cow path. With the full blessing of the law, the boundary she tried to erase was about to be redrawn, and hooves. 3 days after I filed the paperwork for the easement activation, county official named Marla showed up in dust-covered Ford Ranger with clipboard, steel-toed boots, and look that said she didn't have time for suburban nonsense. She didn't shake my hand. She didn't smile. She walked the perimeter with the steady, silent gait of someone who had spent too many years measuring land and not enough dealing with Hoa drama. When she reached the southeastern corner, the spot just behind Karen's ornamental lavender hedge, she paused. Her pen tapped the edge of the easement map, then pointed to marble fire pit shaped like lotus. This structure, she said, is obstructing the designated livestock corridor. I nodded. I figured. Marla clicked her pen shut and signed off with the efficiency of someone stamping time itself. "You're good to proceed," she said, and with that, she disappeared in plume of gravel dust. The next day, I cleared path. I didn't use machinery. I used machete. There was something honest about it. Every swing cut through brush, vines, and Karen's illusion of permanence. I installed new wooden fence posts, not the pressure-treated kind, but rough-cut cedar with character, the kind that would rot naturally into the soil like bones. At the point where the old pasture met Karen's property line, I placed wide steel gate, reinforced and built to last. Overhead, I mounted a sign I burned by hand. Authorized Cowpath County Easement Pound 457B. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Do not obstruct. Please do not feed the cows. Do not fight the law." The cows didn't take to it right away. Buttercup sniffed the open gate like it was trapped. Daisy refused to budge at all until I scattered trail of molasses cubes along the path. Dolly, brave but confused, wandered halfway in before Deech to munch patch at Karen's creeping time, but I waited. I stood still as they sniffed, grazed, and finally stepped forward, one hoof at a time. They crossed the threshold into territory that had once been denied. There was no parade, no trumpet, no great moment of reckoning, just the soft sound of cloven hoofs pressing into ornamental mulch. A faint moo that echoed like a quiet gabble. Karen's first reaction wasn't seen, it was heard. Scream cut through the air. Not sharp, not shrill, but long and like the death rattle of entitlement. She burst onto her back porch, barefoot, her bathrobe tied with a fury knot, and stared at the cows like they were ghosts from a slaughterhouse haunting her precious landscaping. I didn't say a word. I handed her laminated copy of the permit, stapled to wooden post near the gate. She read it again. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she did something both predictable and pathetic. She tore the paper in half, crumpled the pieces, and hurled them at Dolly, who mistook them for snack. That night, I emailed every relevant document to the whole board, the sheriff's office, and for good measure, the local gardening club that Karen presided over. I titled the email Compliance Notification, Agricultural Easement Reinstatement. Kindly movie aside, the responses were varied. The sheriff's office acknowledged receipt. The whole replied with neutral. Noted, but the gardening club, they removed her as president within 48 hours. Apparently, manure doesn't pair well with heirloom roses within week. The path was more than functional. It was habitual. The cows lined up at dawn like pilgrims at Sacred Gate. Buttercup found a new favorite scratching post in the form of A vintage sundial Karen had installed beside a Japanese maple. Daisy regularly knocked over a decorative watering can with theatrical disdain. Dolly somehow always managed to graze precisely on the spot where Karen had once hosted her Zen brunches. It was as if the land itself remembered her arrogance and had summoned its own form of atonement. Then came the people. At first it was children, wide-eyed and whispering behind fences, pointing at the cows like they were circus performers. Then the adults followed. A retired man named Frank brought a folding chair and a thermos every morning, waving at me with the slow, deliberate joy of someone who had waited his entire life for petty justice. A teenager launched an Instagram page called Moo Watch, which documented the daily march of the herd with captions like Buttercup, Queen of the Lawn, and Sir Fluffington still in hiding. By the end of the second week, the spectacle had become ritual. Someone brought apples. Someone else left a note. This is the best thing that's ever happened to this neighborhood. Karen responded by hiding. Her once beloved patio furniture disappeared under tarps. The fire pit remained cold. Her dog stopped barking, but we all knew she hadn't given up. She just needed time to reload her arsenal of indignation. She returned on Monday, hair slicked back, outfit precise. She carried clipboard, the universal weapon of suburban warfare. She marched to the Hoe office and demanded an emergency session. She argued that I was devaluing property, violating the sanctity of residential aesthetic, and threatening community cohesion. She called the cows biohazard with hooves. She accused me of orchestrating livestock-based psychological attack. The board listened politely. Then a woman named Dana, who had recently started selling cow-themed yard signs, stood up and said, "Karen, we warned you. You picked this fight." The room nodded. Someone clapped. Stormed out. The next day she planted hedges, not shrubs, not bushes, hedges, tall, dense, ornamental barricades designed to line the edge of the easement like green resentment. I let her finish. Then I filed a notice of obstruction with the county. They came within 72 hours. Removed the hedges. Fined her for noncompliance. The officer left. A yellow warning tag tied to her bird bath. Do not obstruct the authorized livestock path. Karen didn't speak to me again, but she began speaking to others. Whispered alliances, Facebook posts with vague accusations, passive-aggressive newsletters with phrases like, "Some people think they're above community values." But her voice had lost its power. The neighborhood wasn't angry. They were entertained. My cows were walking, mooing, proof that sometimes justice wears four stomachs and a gentle expression. Around this time, I received a package, no return address inside, a cookie shaped like a cow with icing that read, "Keep moving." I smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about cows anymore. It was about principle, about line that had been crossed, not with boots, but with bolt cutters, and about man who decided not to yell or sue or break, just walk the line, one hoofprint at a time. By the third week, the cow path wasn't just novelty. It was phenomenon. The ritual had taken root so deeply in the rhythm of the neighborhood that people began timing their mornings around it. Retirees brought their coffee outside precisely at 7:15 a.m. Families lined their kids up at the fence like they were waiting for float and parade. One neighbor kindergarten teacher named Marisol began bringing her students on mini field trips to observe peaceful farm animals in motion. She called it mindfulness in motion. The cows, of course, remained oblivious to their new status as local celebrities. Buttercup paused longer in Karen's yard, sometimes circling the flower beds as if trying to remember where she'd left something. Daisy became increasingly bold, using her forehead to nudge Karen's gnome collection like she was testing them for weaknesses. Dolly, bless her wandering spirit, once attempted to chew through the welcome mat on Karen's back porch. Karen, on the other hand, had shadow of her former self. She no longer appeared in public with the same fire and force that once characterized her whole reign. She still wore sunglasses, but now they were oversized shields rather than statements of superiority. Her posture had stiffened not from pride, but from tension. Every move seemed to pull her tighter, every hoofprint in her yard like an insult etched into sod. But retreat was not in her DNA. If she couldn't win by screaming or legislating, she would plot, and her next move wasn't loud, it was almost invisible. I noticed the first signs not from Karen, but from Buttercup. She approached the gate like usual, ears flicking forward, nose twitching, but instead of walking through, she hesitated. Her front hoof touched the edge of the path, and then she backed away, snorting softly. At first, I assumed it was nothing. Maybe she just wasn't hungry, or the wind carried an odd scent. But then Daisy did the same, and Dolly refused to step forward at all, huffing and turning away to graze at the far side of the pasture. 3 cows, 3 refusals. That was not coincidence. I walked the path myself, slowly, carefully, scanning the ground. That's when I saw him. Scattered clusters of dark brown pellets nestled among the grass near Karen's property line. They looked like trail mix, innocuous at a glance, but they were too neatly placed, too intentional. I bagged a few samples in a Ziploc and drove them to the local veterinary clinic. I didn't tell them where they came from, just asked them to test for anything unusual. The call came the next morning. The vet's voice was clipped, concerned. Luke, he said, there's diphenhydramine in those samples. You're looking at enough to sedate medium-sized mammal. It wouldn't kill cow, not outright, but it'd knock them off balance, confuse their system. Maybe worse if they ingested enough. Karen hadn't just tried to block the cows. She tried to drug them. I didn't confront her right away. I installed 2 more trail cameras instead. One mounted in the oak tree near the property line, another hidden inside an old feed bucket beside the gate. For 2 nights, nothing. Then on the third, the footage came in. Karen dressed all in black like she was auditioning for community theater version of Mission Impossible, crept through the gate with plastic bag in hand. She scattered the contents along the path with the precision of someone who believed herself above consequences. As she turned to leave, she tripped over the decorative stone rabbit and dropped the rest of the bag, muttering curse words loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. I burned the footage to a SD drive. Then I went to the sheriff's office. The deputy who watched the clip didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He asked for second viewing, then printed out the relevant statutes from county ordinance book. This, he said, tapping the desk, is animal endangerment, criminal trespass, and malicious property interference. We'll need an official statement. You've got your evidence. Karen was served with court summons 2 days later. I didn't see her when it happened, but I heard the commotion from 3 houses away, shriek followed by volley of barking from her dogs. Witnesses said she accused the deputy of colluding with the bovine mafia, which may have been the most surreal phrase I've ever heard secondhand. Regardless, she now had to explain to a judge why she was feeding sedatives to livestock that didn't belong to her on land she had no right to touch. At the hearing, her attorney tried to pivot, claimed she was leaving treats for wildlife and unaware of potential risks to domesticated animals. But the footage told a different story. The vet's toxicology report sealed it, and when the judge asked Karen if she'd ever had prior conflicts with me or was long enough to be damning, my lawyer calmly slid file across the table. Inside, 32 pages of incident reports, photos, emails, and Ho citations, all dated, documented, and in chronological order from the moment she cut the fence. The courtroom went silent. Reporter from the local paper scribbled furiously. Karen folded her arms so tightly her fake nails left marks on her skin. The sentence wasn't jail. It didn't need to be. She was fined, ordered to attend class on animal cruelty prevention, and made to issue formal written apology, not just to me, but to the entire Ho. The judge's final ruling included permanent restriction against interfering with the livestock easement in any way. She was also put on 6-month property inspection cycle during which the county had full authority to assess her compliance. She didn't return home immediately. Rumor had it she stayed at her sister's place 2 towns over. When she finally came back, the fire was gone. The flags came down. The gnomes disappeared. Her patio lights never came on again. Her backyard stood still like stage after the curtain has dropped. She no longer greeted anyone, not even with her eyes. And the dogs, they didn't bark, they barely existed anymore. Quiet as the empty chairs on her porch, the cow path remained open, the gates stood firm. And every morning, without fail, the herd resumed their gentle march through the land that had once tried to deny them. But something had shifted. The war was over, the noise was gone. All that was left was the soft sound of hooves pressing into freshly mowed grass and the occasional grunt of satisfaction from cow finally allowed to walk its path. I didn't throw a party. I didn't spike the football. I just walked out every morning, opened the gate, and watched them go. It wasn't victory I felt. It was stillness. And in that stillness, kind of peace that only land can grant. Unbothered, unmoved, and finally respected. It was Saturday morning when the last thread of Karen's influence finally snapped. The sun had barely crested over the eastern ridge, casting golden light across the field and bathing everything in the soft warmth of early fall. The air was crisp, scent of turning leaves and dampers, and the cows were in high spirits. Buttercup had developed a newfound love for Karen's former herb garden, where she would nestle down amidst what remained of once carefully labeled lavender and sage, chewing contentedly and occasionally flopping over for nap that flattened entire square feet of decorative mulch. Daisy had begun ritual of pressing her nose against the back window of Karen's house each morning as if checking for signs of life inside, leaving smudged moisture streaks across the glass, mirrored the slow melt of Karen's authority. Dolly, curious and untethered, had taken to lifting her front legs onto the edge of Karen's patio and peering into the covered barbecue grill like she was checking the coals. The transformation from suburban enclave to livestock landmark had not gone unnoticed. Every morning now, people gathered like it was an event. There were lawn chairs, travel mugs, pastries. Frank, the retiree with the thermos, started bringing binoculars, just for fun. Someone set up foldable chalkboard that read, Moo Count. Day 23 with updates marked in colorful handwriting. Children brought handmade signs that said things like Team Buttercup and Let the Cows March. Local bakeries began offering cow-shaped cookies with icing smiles. What had started as petty revenge had morphed into cultural ritual. The Hoet, which once issued citations over mailbox colors, now found itself powerless to rein in the growing sense of neighborly rebellion. They didn't fight it, they leaned in. Even the board president, woman named Clean, who used to side with Karen on every ruling, now walked her dog beside the path and smiled every time Dolly paused to sniff her shoes. Karen, meanwhile, had become a ghost wrapped in bitterness. Her windows remained shut, her blinds never opened. She no longer attended home meetings. She no longer patrolled the street with her clipboard or sent passive-aggressive emails about unsanctioned Halloween decorations. Her nameplate on the Hoa community board was quietly replaced with a laminated photo of Buttercup and a handwritten quote. Sometimes you mess with the bull and get the moo, but everyone, Karen wasn't finished. Her silence was not surrender. It was recalibration. So when the real estate sign appeared on her front lawn one afternoon, weathered and leaning slightly left, the neighborhood didn't cheer. They waited, because no one believed she would go quietly, and they were right. 2 weeks later, a new figure arrived. Not buyer, not yet, but realtor, clipboard in hand, measuring the backyard with practice steps. His assistant followed behind with camera, snapping pictures of the fire pit, the clover-covered lawn, the scratched pavers, path worn into the grass by months of hooves. I approached them, tipping my hat politely, asking if they needed any documentation about the easement. The realtor laughed not unkindly. She didn't mention the cows, he said, but she did list the yard as multi-use green space with character. He paused, raised an eyebrow. You're the farmer, right? The one with the viral cows? I nodded. He smiled wider. Well then, I guess I found the story she didn't want told. The listing went live the following Monday. By Wednesday, it had been shared over 100 times on local Facebook groups and appeared on a Reddit thread titled Hoa Queen Defeated by Cow Justice. The headline photo showed Dolly mid-stride, her tail flicked back like Kate, while Karen's house loomed in the background like monument to bad decisions. The comments were relentless, merciless, and strangely poetic. This is the energy I want for all my neighborhood disputes, someone wrote. Another said, all heroes wear capes. Some wear others. One local journalist asked for an interview. I declined. Not out of modesty, but because the cows were doing all the talking. Their daily presence was louder than any quote I could offer. But the real twist came not from Karen's retreat, but from her replacement. The first serious buyer was a man named Owen, who arrived in dusty pickup with a trailer full of goats and smile that could have sold sunshine. He was lean, suntan, and wore a straw hat like it had grown from his head. We met at the property line. No pomp, pretense. He stuck out his hand and said, I'm thinking of turning this place into micro-dairy, goat cheese workshops, school tours, the whole deal. I heard about your cows. Figured this might be sacred ground. I didn't ask him twice. I told him everything. About the easement, the cows, Karen's reign, the videos, the trial. He listened, nodding slowly, and then said, hell's story. But I reckon this place deserves better ending. He made his offer that afternoon. Karen accepted without negotiation. She left 2 days later without a word, just a moving truck and a cloud of silence. No farewell, no apology. She pulled away like a chapter closing on a book nobody finished reading. The goats arrived. A week later, 10 of them, each with their own name tag, each named after a famous general, Hannibal, Caesar, Napoleon. They took to Karen's former backyard like it was mountain stronghold. Within 20 minutes, one of them had perched atop lotus-shaped fire pit, bleeding in triumph. Owen didn't stop him. He took a photo instead and captioned it, New Management. Owen tore down the privacy screens. He replaced the grass with clover. He built milking station near the back gate and added small wooden archway over the cow path entrance. On it he carved, Karen's crossing where entitlement meets hooves. He told me he wanted it to stand not as mockery but as memory. Monument to boundaries, to resilience, and to the cows who walked without fear. We became fast friends, traded eggs and cheese, shared tools, told stories. One weekend, we hosted an open house for the neighborhood. Families came. Children fed goats. Elderly couples bought jam. A little boy asked me, why didn't you just yell back at the lady when she was mean? I knelt beside him and said, because yelling doesn't fix fences. Cows do, and patience. And just like that, the neighborhood healed, slowly, not in grand gestures, but in smaller ones. Neighbor planted wildflowers along the edge of the path. Someone else donated bench for people to sit and watch the animals. Even the Hoet, once fortress of rigidity, softened. They began hosting monthly Ag Appreciation Days. Karen was never mentioned again. Her name faded like the grass she once tried to control. Life settled into something more honest. The cows walked. The goats climbed. And every now and then someone new would stop by, ask about the archway, and hear the tale. Not a revenge, but a reclamation of land and dignity, of quiet triumph. And that was enough, because some victories don't roar. They march hoof by patient step. 3 months after Karen's departure, the neighborhood had settled into an almost idyllic rhythm. Not because there were no longer problems, but because the energy that once fed the hoist drama machine had shifted, redirected into something quieter, more organic, less fueled by passive aggression and more sustained by shared understanding that perhaps not everything needed to be controlled. The cow path remained the centerpiece of this transformation. Each morning, the gate creaked open like curtain rising on small town play, and Buttercup, Daisy, and Dolly made their entrance with the same steady grace they had always shown. The neighbors still came. Frank now brought his granddaughter, who had started naming each cow's favorite snack. Marisol brought sketch pads for her students and let them draw the animals in charcoal and chalk. A group of teenagers made short films set entirely along the path, calling it Moose the Law, and posted it to YouTube, where it surprisingly gained modest traction. Even the local high school incorporated the story into their civics curriculum under a unit titled Modern Land Rights and Community Ethics, and still no one spoke of Karen. Her house had been transformed almost beyond recognition. Owen had turned her former backyard into a clover field, the kind that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. His goats, ever curious and determined, had claimed every corner of the lot, climbing on picnic tables, exploring planter boxes, and standing on the remnants of the Lotus fire pit like tiny kings of reclaimed soil. Owen hosted weekend cheese workshops where laughter mingled with the sound of goat bells. At one, a young couple told him the story had inspired them to buy land of their own. "We never thought you could win against and however," they said. Owen just smiled and replied, "You can't win against control, but you can outlast it with truth and goats." I kept to my routine. Fed the cows, rotated the pasture, monitored the path, repaired fence line once after windstorm, repainted the easement sign when the sun faded the letters. I added few wildflowers along the path to encourage pollinators and built small bench near the gate. Not for the visitors, but for me. It faced west toward the tree line where the sun dipped low each evening and scattered gold across the land. From that bench, I could see the arc of everything. Not just the path, but the story. How a single snip of bolt cutters had rippled through so many lives. How a refusal to yield had become a lesson in grounded defiance. One afternoon, while sitting there, a letter arrived. Not by email, not digital. A real letter handwritten in blue ink on cream-colored stationery. The return address was generic. Just P.O. Box in another state. But the handwriting, unmistakable, was from Karen. I read it twice before reacting. It wasn't long, just single page. No apology, not really, more of a reflection. She wrote that she had seen the videos, read the articles, even heard about the goats. She said she had underestimated what it meant to trespass, not just on land, but on something deeper, that she'd grown up believing boundaries were flexible, negotiable if your voice was loud enough or your lawn neat enough, that she had thought authority came from volume, not values. She wrote, "You didn't humiliate me. I did that myself. You just held the line. There was no signature. Just the final line. If the land remembers, I hope someday it forgets." So I folded the letter and placed it inside small box I kept in the barn, alongside old photos of my grandfather, faded field maps, and the original printout of the county easement. I didn't frame it, didn't display it, just kept it, not as closure, but as context. That same week, documentary crew reached out. They wanted to film segment about the story for series on rural resilience. I said no. Politely, they pressed promised good lighting, fair narrative, positive spin. I still said no, because the cows didn't need spotlight. The path didn't need narration. Some stories are better left to breathe on their own without cuts or commentary. Still, the attention lingered. Podcast featured the saga. Local artists painted mural downtown showing Buttercup walking calmly through chaotic swirl of host citations and garden gnomes. Bakery released seasonal. Karen's crossing crumble filled with clover honey and goat cheese. The town was not by forgetting, but by transforming memory into meaning. Then came fall. The air turned sharper. The clover turned amber. The cows grew slower in their steps, but no less deliberate. On the anniversary of the easement's reinstatement, Owen and I hosted small event. Not celebration, not quite, more of gathering. People brought food, sat on blankets, shared stories. We projected silent video montage. Clips from the security footage, stills from social media, photos of the cows walking in sun and fog, no voiceover, just music and memory. At the end is darkened and the last photo faded. Someone in the crowd asked what I had learned from it all. I thought for a long moment. Then I said that boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about reminding us who we are. And when someone tries to erase them, it's not about anger. It's about drawing the line again, clearer, deeper, and with better fence posts. That night I sat on the bench and watched the moon rise over the path. The cows were resting, the goats were quiet. Owen was cleaning up from the workshop. I breathed in the scent of hay and dusk. The quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. And in that stillness, I understood something I hadn't until then, that the most lasting justice doesn't come from courts or cliques. It comes from walking your land every day, feeding your animals, fixing what breaks, and refusing to disappear. A week later, I carved Final Edition into the archway above the gate, just 4 words, small, unobtrusive, but true. Beneath Karen's Crossing, I added, still here, still walking. And every time the cows passed under, their soft steps echoing into the morning, I smiled. Is some victories, don't I? They continue, one hoofprint at a time.